Finding Common Ground, Exploring the Core Essence of Communication, and 5 Strategies for Building Stronger Relationships with Customers and Coworkers. These are just 3 of the topics to be addressed in How to Develop and Maintain Rapport, featuring George Walther. George Walther is an international expert in helping people to use the power of communication to achieve sales, service, and business results. He's the author of several popular books, including Power Talking and Upside Down Marketing. And he's one of the most sought-after platform speakers in the world. Let's join in as George Walther talks about how to develop and maintain rapport.
In today's session, we'll focus on developing and maintaining rapport. Now, when I say rapport, what are the words that come to mind? If you were to think, what's the definition of rapport? What words come into your mind? If you have a feeling of rapport with someone, what is it?
Connection.
Comfort, connection, you feel like you bond, there's something in common. And of course, you communicate best with people when the natural barriers to communication are dissolved, when you feel like there's that bond, that common ground, that connection. And it is up to a superb communicator to actively seek rapport. Now, many of us communicate with somebody who comes into our lives. It may be a vendor or a customer or somebody who you want to join your team, somebody who works in another division or another part of your organization, and we may be having a very first contact with this person. And it's interesting what a huge influence that first contact has on the relationship down the line. There are some great tools available, particularly using the internet these days, to research people who you want to establish rapport with. There's somebody with whom I do business who is a speakers bureau who helps me to find clients who I can serve well as speakers, and I happen to know that he loves trains. He's a railroad nut. And I also love trains. So I've noticed that in virtually every conversation I have with this guy, there is something about trains. We always bring it up because it's our common bond. I encourage you, when you're doing business with anybody outside your organization, somebody with whom you don't have a direct connection already, go on the internet and see what you can find out for their name. There may be some association. For example, I have an editor, the most recent book that I have just completed writing. My editor, in my introduction phone call, I wanted to actively seek rapport. I thought, how can I get this call started so that we can have something in common? And I put his name in the internet, and there were lots, it was a common name, there were lots of people with that name. I found one, though, that was geographically close to where the publishing house was, so I thought, well, maybe that's him. And I looked it up and found that, yes, this was the individual who is now an editor at my publisher. And the citation on the web was that he had done a project at a small men's college. I had never heard of this men's college. So I thought, and I went to the website for that men's college. And of all things, they had at their website the college fight song, so that I could click on that page and it would play the college fight song. And so in my introductory phone call to this individual, I had my literary agent introduce me and say, George, I'd like you to meet Michael Cunningham, who we would like to have as your editor. And rather than saying anything, the usual, well, it's so nice to meet you, rather than saying anything, I had a little tape recorder, and I pushed the button and played back his college fight song. He was going, what's that? Hey, how'd you get that? And it was a wonderful way to immediately kind of break the ice and let him know that finding common ground was something that I considered important enough to do. It really just took a few minutes to do this. It got our conversation started in a very unusual way. So you can develop rapport by actively seeking common ground. It may be a geographic background, something you have in common with raising kids, maybe a hobby or another interest. And you can also seek to develop rapport by adjusting your style of communication. Now, of course, all of us speak in a slightly different fashion. There are many variables. We speak at different rates. We have different levels of vocabulary. We have different forcefulness as we speak. For example, when I'm talking with you now, my average rate of speech is between 140 and 150 words a minute. Here in North America, where we are, that's the average rate of speech, about 150 words a minute. So, if you're seeking to establish rapport with somebody who you're just beginning a relationship with, what's the right rate of speech? How many words a minute should you speak? Well, about 150 is a good answer if that person speaks 150. If you're calling somebody who lives in New York in a very rushed life, you better make it 350 words a minute. The point is that whatever speaking style the other person has, that's the style that will be most effective for you. So pay attention to their manner of speaking and adjust your rate of speech and also your vocabulary. If you intuitively pick up that the person with whom you're speaking has a pretty basic, simple vocabulary, you're not out to impress them with the very large words that you know and can use. Your aim is not to impress them. Your aim is to develop comfort with them. So you adjust your vocabulary to match theirs. Likewise, you won't get much attention from the other person if you speak very simply, and they are obviously somebody who has a high level of education and a vocabulary to match. So excellent communicators seek rapport both by looking for common ground about backgrounds and also by adjusting their style of communication. There are three styles of communication: audio, visual, and kinesthetic. If someone says, "Gee, that sounds good to me," as I hear what you're saying, those are signals to you that this person is somebody who prefers the audio channel. Or somebody may say, "You know, as I look at that, here's what I see." It was probably not the best approach for you to now respond and say, "Well, listen to it this way. Can you hear what I'm saying?" You're probably better off to use visual terms. And on the other hand, they may say, "I'm trying to get a feel for what you're saying," which would indicate that they're a kinesthetic, expressive person. So I don't want to make a big deal about this and say, "Oh, pay careful attention, write down every word. How many words a minute do they speak? What's their vocabulary?" No. I mean to use your intuition to say to yourself at the beginning of a conversation, "I want to make this other person feel comfortable talking with me. So let me just listen. What's their style? How do they express themselves? Do they speak quickly or slowly? What's their vocabulary like?" And I don't mean that you're counting the words. In the back of your mind, though, if your aim is to develop rapport with the other person, you will intuitively adjust your communication style accordingly. Listening is not what most people think it is. Most people think that listening is the absence of speaking. "Oh, I'm not talking, so this means I'm listening." Listening is an active process. It's interesting. All of us have learned how to read and write. Some of us have had formal training in how to speak. Very few people get any formal training in listening because we assume it just means, "Oh, don't talk, let them talk, that's listening." Listening is a very active process. I always think of the old Chinese proverb, which is, "I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand." And the point of that proverb to me is that because rapport is the process of developing understanding with another person, the more of your senses that are involved, the better your odds of being able to, so to speak, put yourself in the other person's shoes. So when listening, one of the very best things you can do is jot down notes. Because as you do, as you're taking notes, you are not only hearing, you're also seeing yourself, you're seeing the words on paper, and because it's an active process where you're involved in scribing the information, you're using your motor reflexes as well. The more of your senses that are involved in taking in the information they have to offer, the more likely you are to both remember it and also understand. Now this applies certainly in telephone calls. It also applies face-to-face. In fact, I consider it a huge compliment when somebody with whom I'm speaking says, "I want to be sure I follow everything you're saying, so I'm going to jot some notes for myself." That's not a distraction. That's them saying, "I consider what you're saying is important." So with you in your positions of leadership, When a member of your team comes to talk about an employment situation, or if you were having an encounter with somebody in a different part of your organization, or if you were dealing with a customer, whether it's on the phone or face-to-face, make listening an active process characterized by note-taking. Because as soon as you pull out that pencil and paper and start taking notes, you're paying the other person a great compliment and helping yourself to stay focused on what they're saying. Now that it's an important part of the active listening process called the feedback loop. You see, when you convey information to another person, you assume that they are correctly hearing what you have to say, and you know what happens when you make assumptions. That's going to get us into trouble. So rather than assuming, the only real way to verify that the other person does clearly understand what you're saying is to get them to repeat it back to you. Careful how you do this, though. If you were to simply say, okay, was that clear? Did you understand that? All you're going to get now is their opinion about whether they understood it. You're not going to really know they understood it. Here's what not to say. You know, I want to be sure you understood that correctly, so what do you think I said? Because taking that approach leaves them thinking that you're really saying, I don't trust your intellectual abilities and I don't think you quite kept up with me. So instead, think about the idea of using these three fingers that point back to you as a reminder of your responsibility in the communication process. Instead of saying, did you understand? Say, I want to be sure that I explained that clearly enough. Let me make sure I did a good job. What did you understand? So to emphasize that you as the professional communicator, and there isn't a single skill that's more important in leadership and management than being a superb communicator. There isn't a single skill more important. Because after all, well, some of the people you lead are people, yeah? Some of the people who buy from your organization are people. Some of the people who donate to your nonprofit are people. In fact, the core essence of being a superb leader is somebody who has the great skill of communicating well. And that's way more than putting it out there. It's also being a great listener. The feedback loop allows you to verify that you've put it out there clearly. And if somebody is expressing something to you, you want to do the same thing. That is not to say, you know, that was pretty confusing what you said there, which they will hear as, oh, you're saying I don't express myself well? Instead to say, I want to be sure I stuck right with you, that I completely kept up with what you were explaining. So bring that personal responsibility home. Now in the process of developing rapport, there's one of the most basic principles in making people feel comfortable with you that is practiced by so few people. In fact, as I give speeches and seminars around the world, I've often asked people, you know, what's one skill you wish you were better at? And the number one response that most people feel uncomfortable about is, I'm not very good with names. How many people here today would feel like, I'm just not really that good at catching people's names? Most of us would like to improve in this area. As Dale Carnegie said way back in 1936 in How to Win Friends and Influence People, the sweetest sound to any person in any language is the sound of his or her own name. We all feel good hearing our names. Don't you often at the supermarket or in some crowded situation hear somebody calling out somebody else's name who you happen to share? I mean, if I'm in a store and I hear somebody calling George, like, oh, they want me, they want me. Hey, when it comes to mastering names, it's really pretty simple. There are three key steps. The first is to make sure that you decide to master names. Most of us think, I forget names. That's not actually technically correct. You don't forget people's names. You don't forget anything. It's all going in. All the information, the stimulation that comes into our brains is recorded there. You don't forget names. It's just that you don't capture them in the first place in a way that makes them easy to retrieve and use. So the first step is to decide, as soon as you hear another person's name, to stop yourself right there and say, wait, I'm not letting that get past me. And I know in my own case, if I am unable to come up with a person's name, it's not because I remembered it for 10 minutes and then lost it. No, I lost it in a second because whoosh, it went straight into my long-term storage without being in a quick, easily retrieved area. So step one, decide you're going to pay the other person the compliment of getting their name right. 2, make an association. The more vivid and visual the association, the better. At the gym I visit each day, there is a parking attendant, and I go at the same time, first thing in the morning each day, and as I leave, this parking attendant is the guy who always stamps on my little parking ticket. And I thought, if I see this guy every day, I mean, one of my core values in life is that if you're going to have an encounter with someone anyway, whether it's a car rental clerk or a checker at your grocery store, you have the choice to either make that a completely routine, matter-of-fact transaction, or you can have it be somewhat unpleasant, or you can also make the choice to say, gosh, if I'm going to be with my grocery store checkout clerk for 3 minutes anyway, might as well have fun with it. So one of the best ways I know of to have fun and develop personal connections is to use people's names. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be going through this little parking stall every day and having him stamp my ticket, I want to find out who he is. And he was obviously from a different cultural background than I was, so his name was not going to be Joseph or something common. And I asked him his name that first day, and he said, Bienna. Bienna. I thought, Bienna? I don't know that name, Bienna. I didn't know the spelling of the name. So I first made an association and thought, Bienna. That sounds kind of like Vienna, like Vienna, Austria. I thought, what do I think of with Vienna, Austria? I think of those white Lippenzahner stallions. I thought, okay, every time I go through here, I'm going to picture him with a whip on one of these horses, getting him up on his hind legs in Vienna, and I go, oh, Vienna. And every day I see him, and every day I go through, okay, he's in Vienna with that's right, Vienna, Bienna, that's his name, Bienna. 1, decide you're going to remember names. 2, make an association. 3, use the name. And I recommend in a typical conversation that you use the name 3 times. First time, right after they tell you what it is. So that if I meet Bienna for the first time and he says his name, I'm going to repeat it right back. Bienna, oh, that's a nice, unusual name. I'm going to right away register the name and say it back to him because, of course, doing so helps me to remember it. It's also complimenting the other person. Second time, at some point during the conversation, somewhere in the middle, I'm going to bring that name up again. Third, the very last thing I will do as I leave that person is use their name. Now, I want to stress something here, and that is that people find it very annoying and phony if you use their name a lot. I'll always remember doing a series of sales training videos, and the producer said, George, you know, I see you've got some excellent material you're going to be presenting here, George, and as I went through the outline, I noticed you've got a lot of techniques that will really be very effective at selling. One thing, George, I didn't see in your script, and it's a technique I use all the time, George, with great effect, is the technique of, and George, you may have heard this from others, is of you, and every time he said my name, I'm going, don't say it again, don't say it again, because it seems like such a phony, hyped up, artificial effort people make. So don't use other people's names again and again and again. 3 times is fine. I know, for example, because of my work, I travel a lot by airplane. When I get on the plane, the very first thing I'll do is introduce myself to the person sitting next to me. On my flight coming here, the individual's name was Ted. I start right away by saying, hey, Ted, my name is George, because I think it's ridiculous. We're going to be sitting this close to each other for the next couple of hours. And you know that awkward feeling you have on a flight? It's been a couple of hours, and you go like, what was your name anyway? And you kind of want to ask. Do it right away. Now, personally, for me, as soon as I ask the other person's name, I turn away and read a magazine or do something because I know they're thinking, oh no, this person's a talker. They're going to be talking at me the whole flight. So I get the name so that ice is broken. I'm not going to now get involved in the conversation. Second, at some point during the flight, usually when I'm given a bag of peanuts or a beverage and saying this is a break time, then I'm going to begin the conversation by saying, oh, Ted, tell me where begin the conversation with the person's name. And then when I get up to leave, I'm going to say, Ted, I enjoyed flying with you. 3 times is a good guideline for a typical conversation, not over and over and over again. So, developing rapport involves being a good listener, using people's names, and also making people feel comfortable with you in a nonverbal way. Now, for example, let's just suppose that you worked in an organization where you were dealing with somebody who was upset with you. You were handling a complaint, for example. You know everybody has had some exposure to body language, and you know that the worst thing you could do would be to cross your arms or have a glowering sort of expression. Let's take it a step further. Let's suppose that I'm here in my office and you're coming in with a complaint or something that you want to talk with me about seriously, and I haven't given it enough thought to say, okay, I want this person to feel comfortable. Let me develop some rapport. The worst thing I might do is to take a seat across the table from you, have my arms crossed, or to make things a little worse, let's suppose that I slip off my watch and place the watch on the desk in front of me. What's the message? Without me saying anything, what's the nonverbal message I'm conveying here?
You're late. Go away.
I don't have much time for you. I'm closed off to you. There's a barrier between us. If I wanted to develop rapport with you in a tense situation, the very best thing I could do is to literally pick my chair up and move it to your side of the table. So that the message is not, it's you against me, and here's the issue, we're going to fight it out. Rather, the message is, we are together. We're on the same side of the table. We have a common issue. Here's the issue. You and I are going to put ourselves next to each other as a team and work on the issue. If I did take my watch off, notice, if I took my watch off and put it face down on the table, what would be the message I'm conveying? Take your time. This is important to me. I'm going to take all the time necessary. And there are so many aspects of body language like this, that the tiniest change, is your watch face up or face down, makes all the difference in the way another person perceives how they'll be interacting with you. As outstanding leaders and managers, all of us want to be great communicators. And that goes far beyond choosing positive language. It goes far beyond phrasing things in a way that's likely to get your point across. It includes developing rapport, making the other person feel comfortable, being a superb listener. In wrapping up today, let's review the points we've talked about. First, remember, invest a little time to do some research, a little background about the individual you're going to be meeting for the first time. Definitely mentally decide, I'm going to look for common ground and I'm going to establish rapport. It's amazing how our subconscious minds get busy and make our wishes come true when we first state them as wishes. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to find common ground and get comfortable with this other person, then you'll get busy and do it. It's also a good idea to be explicit. In that situation, for example, if I were resolving a complaint, it's well worth saying, you want to have a great relationship with us because you buy products from us and you deserve to be happy with your supplier. We want to have a great relationship with you. So really, we're on exactly the same side of this issue. We both want the same outcomes. Go on record. Be explicit. Adjust your speaking style, rate, vocabulary, style of communication, get on their wavelength. Take notes during the interaction. Doing so involves more of your senses and also communicates to the other person that you really care. Take a nonverbal assessment and make sure that everything about your nonverbal message also demonstrates to the other person that you're actively seeking rapport. And those things in combination will help to make you the great communicator that every leader and every manager wants to be. Go put them to work.